Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Kessler from Kessler Insurance Agency, and I am here today on behalf of Cheers for Charity New Hampshire with my dear friend Joanne. Hey, Joanne.
Hey, Lisa. Yes, hi, I'm Joanne Burchuk. I'm with Lighthouse Physical Therapy. And I was just thinking, one of my favorite things about our Cheers for Charity initiative is that every single time we get to learn about a brand new organization that sometimes we've never even heard of. And today is a great example of that. So I'm so happy to welcome Danielle from 21 Senses, a newer organization. And Danielle, we're so excited to hear all about what you guys do. So please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, thank you, Joanne and Lisa. Thank you for the opportunity to share the information about 21 Senses today. So I am the Director of Operations and Programs with 21 Senses, and we are a fairly young nonprofit. We just are starting our third year. So if you do the math, we actually opened our doors about 6 months before COVID. And we all know what COVID has done. So we've rolled with the punches, and we are really proud that as a nonprofit, we're still here. So you may be asking, who are we? What do we do? And our mission is to help advance inclusion for children with invisible disabilities. And I know that's a mouthful. So what we mean by invisible disabilities is another term you may have heard. If you haven't, that's okay as well, is neurodiversity. And it's really talking about children whose brains think differently, and physically the difference is happening inside their brains, where people often think about physical disabilities and they're aware the efforts that have taken place over the last few decades to try to be more inclusive to individuals who have physical limitations, but those are often easier to spot than these invisible disabilities, because the differences aren't happening on a limb that you can visually see. It's happening inside of the brain. And we really focus on children and supporting their families, because let's be honest, every parent just wants what's best for their kid, which often is letting them engage in the community, doing typical, as we often say, childhood activities. And that can be really hard if you have a child that has an invisible disability. And so we work to raise awareness to the community through education and support for both the community and the families, as all in the effort to try to improve inclusion.
Yeah, and I do like the term invisible because, I think people look at somebody and that's all they see. And so they don't know what's going on inside somebody. And could you just dig a little deeper when you talk about these invisible ones? Can you give us some examples of some of the challenges that these kids are facing, and how you are different ways that you're helping them?
Yeah. So just so you understand, invisible disabilities are, as we just talked about, the difference is happening inside the brain. However, for children, their brains are still growing, they're still morphing. And at 21 Senses, we really focus on environmental sensory triggers that are around anyone, because the human being is a sensory craving individual, whether you like to listen to loud music, or maybe you cover your ears and leave the room if somebody turns on loud music. One way or the other, your body has sensory preferences. And if your brain is receiving information differently, sensory triggers in the environment is a huge way in which the brain is a huge area where the brain can have struggles. And so when you get into sensory sensitivities or sensory issues, that's exactly what's happening. And it's actually much more commonplace than you realize. Studies have shown about 1 in 20 adults have sensory struggles where their body may be processing information from one of their 8 sensory systems. And I said that right. Most people know the 5 sensory systems, but there's actually 8 sensory systems that occupational therapists identify. And so if you have 1 in 20 adults struggling, that number actually compounds when you get to children. And that's 1 in 6 children are negatively impacted on a daily basis by sensory stimuli in their environment, and their brains processing that information differently. And I know that sounds really abstract, but the diagnoses that you often see sensory struggles with, there are over 30 different diagnoses. But the ones people most often associate with children are ADHD, autism, PTSD, trauma. But there's more than that. That is because this is an issue that can evolve up into adulthood as well, of like concussions, migraines. Like many of us have had or know of someone who's had a migraine. The sun doesn't actually get brighter when they have the migraine, but their brain is processing that information of the sunlight coming in through their eyes differently and reading it incorrectly. And that is causing them problems. So that's one of those classic examples of where this sensory stimuli and how it can have a negative impact. And so it is much more commonplace than most people realize for children. And so our whole goal is to be conscious of what this is, help people understand that this does actually exist. And because your experience could be different than what someone else's experience is, not because of anything that they're doing wrong, but because their brain is processing that information differently and they don't have the ability to really change that. But we as a community often have the ability to make minor changes that can be more inclusive for that child or that family. Because the reality is, if you as a family are struggling with your child going into public, it ends up resulting in you don't go into public as much. And so that's one of the focus. While we focus on children, it's really supporting the families around those children.
Are you working with maybe the schools, the classrooms to help accommodate, a child that may have, noise issues or,
right. So,
need some space or, whatever their accommodations need to be?
We will work with all organizations, all businesses. We kind of have two approaches. We try to support family through education with real tips and tricks and helping to learn what this appears as and presents as, and giving them practical tips. And that has really been our focus through 2021, is families were limited in being able to leave their home and actually had a lot less support from the community during the last year with COVID. But as COVID is causing the communities to open more, we really are trying to shift back to the focus of trying to help these families and these children get into the community. And so we will work with any businesses, any organizations to help raise awareness of what sensory sensitivities are, what they can present and look like, because they often present as behavioral issues. A lot of times people think that a child is misbehaving, and that's not actually what's happening. The child is just trying to get to a calm state, but they may need some additional sensory input or absence of that sensory input in order for them to get to that calm or regulated state. And so I don't know if I answered that question clearly for you. We are trying to work with OTs and with schools and with other organizations and also with businesses in the communities.
Yeah, we've found, we've had a couple patients that have come into our clinic with sensory issues with smell, and to the extreme, like things that I couldn't even smell. Like, one gal, we would bring her in the back door and have her in the first treatment room so that any patient that might be in the facility that's wearing cologne or
deodorant
or anything. And we went through, like, I think 6 different cleaning products to try to find one that she didn't react to the smell. She fortunately helped us through the process to find one, because when you're not that acutely sensitive,
aware. Yes, exactly. it
Yeah,
seems like
so
they're
it's
crazy or they're misbehaving, and unfortunately for children, it's often perceived as like attention seeking or behavioral, like they're trying to misbehave when that's not the case at all. And this is smell, which is one of those that people can associate with, even though they may not be able to smell the odor as well. But there's every sense, like sound, smell, and sight are the three that are common. But like we said, there's actually 8 senses, like balance, your vestibular sense or your sense of balance. There's your sense of your body movement, your proprioceptive, where it's like your muscles and joints, or we say your external body awareness. And the way I relate that is it's when you can get up in the middle of the night and get to the bathroom without flipping on a light, or close your eyes and touch your fingers to your nose. You know where that is based on your muscles. And then the 8th sense is your interoceptive, or your ability to know your internal body awareness. Like if you have to go to the bathroom, if you know you're cold or you're hot. And if a child isn't registering in the brain, the information coming in isn't matching the information coming out, they make a plan, but it's based on bad data. And so to everyone else, it may look like a bad plan. And if a child's brain isn't fully developed yet, they can very easily become overwhelmed and they just shut down. Like, and that's where we go into our primitive reactions of fight, flight, or flee. And you'll often see like pictures of a child at Walt Disney World that was just completely overwhelmed and is just a hot mess on the ground. And they're saying how nobody can comfort or associate them. And that is, they are deregulated. Their body had too much input coming in and they just shut down. And so while Walt Disney World does an amazing job at producing accommodations to be supportive to these individuals, that's a once in a lifetime experience. That's not an everyday outing. We want to be able to have children be able to go to the children's museum or the movie theater, or the grocery store, or the mall, and be able to participate without feeling like that from that experience, and and allowing families to be able to enjoy their family's childhood years, without it ending in that type of hot mess on the floor, or running away, or one of those fight, flight, or flee responses.
Danielle, I'm dying to ask.
Mhm.
You talked about 8 senses. Where does the name 21 senses come from?
That's a great question. So science actually shows it's constantly changing, as science often is. But when the organization was trying to come up with a name, the founder was, they were looking into how many senses the body has. And 8 is what's like agreed upon by occupational therapists right now, but it can range up into the 60s. It's just a matter of how many subtypes within a sense, and what do they consider a sense versus a subtype or a characteristic of it. And when the organization was being thought out in 2017, 2018, there was a strong, good representation of 21 senses at the time. While not the 8 that are recognized by sensory processing disorder with occupational therapists, it still very clearly showed that the number of senses is much larger than the 5 we often learn in kindergarten. So that's how we came about. Although it's still, it's a moving target, that's how the name 21 senses came about.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying.
Oh,
go ahead,
no
Joanne.
problem.
How are your patients finding you?
So
especially you came out, just before COVID, how are you getting the word out there?
we're
you're
really
around and can help?
unique in the fact that we're 501. The founder is located in Chicago, and we're 501c3 out of Chicago, but we have a branch here in New Hampshire. And with that, we are active in both locations. And so we have started, and people have become aware of us through a couple of different methods. One, getting involved in the community in fashions like this, and finding I'm going to call it like niche, the special needs families who we are able to help and support. And it's not always special needs too, where people often associate like autism, anxiety. children with anxiety very much can be at a heightened state of awareness, and which can cause sensory sensitivities. And being in front of those communities and sharing this information, we have a strong presence on social media. We have very much tried to support these areas, but the one of the wonderful things about about the internet in general is we've also been able to provide support for families that live in areas without the resources in their communities, through some of our online public resources that we do through digital format. So it's a matter of raising awareness, letting people know, and it's a constant for us to try to help families be aware that we are here, that we have taken, and businesses and organizations create sensory friendly hours, and they do a lot of effort to do this, but when they go and market that, they often market it to their patrons. And if you're not a patron of that business because you're not getting into the community as much, you may not be aware of those sensory friendly hours. And so one of the original projects we did was start to try to consolidate a listing for families to come and find sensory friendly hours and find businesses that are making accommodations and detailing better what those accommodations are in one central place, not having to piecemeal it because you've heard of it from like your Aunt Sue that just so happened to hear and wanted to mention that it might be helpful for your family type of thing. And so we're constantly trying to get these tools and these tips and tricks and information in front of those families. So, but that, so it's a word of mouth is a big part of it right now. We've also been doing a lot of pushes through social media.
That's fantastic. So there's so much going on here. I'm grateful that you're sharing this information, and I'm so grateful that you shared this information with us today. It has been fascinating. I have notes. I have all sorts of notes I've just taken about all sorts of things that I wasn't aware about, and I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, because I think it's sort of that like that hidden or that invisible issue that needs to be brought to the forefront. And I think it impacts a lot more families than most of us realize. I mean, even your numbers with 1 in 20 adults or 1 in 6 children impacted, right? Like just huge numbers. And so I think the work you're doing here is really important, and we appreciate you sharing it with us here today.
Thank you. And thank you for helping us to get that awareness out, because you don't know, you can't provide empathy for anyone if you aren't aware that there's even a struggle there.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Danielle. We appreciate it.
Thank you.